Commission has raised concerns about irregularities and perceived conflict of interest in the awarding of millions of dollars in contracts by the Health Ministry to the public relations firm Market Me Consulting Limited. The concerns are contained in a report tabled in the House of Representatives today. But the Director of Investigations, Kevon Stevenson, says given what he describes as evidentiary gaps, there's no basis on which to recommend criminal charges be pursued by the Director of Corruption Prosecution. Siobhan Campbell reports.
The Integrity Commission investigated alleged conflicts of interest involving Health and Wellness Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton, the Ministry of Health, and Market Me. The investigation looked into whether Dr. Tufton used his power to direct the ministry to award contracts to Market Me. The 15 contracts amount to almost $80 million. The anti-corruption body also examined the state of the relationship between Dr. Tufton and one of the principals of Market Me, Lindsay McDonough, and whether that relationship had a bearing on the award of contracts to the company. The IC's probe covered the period January 2016 to December 2020. According to the 88-page report, the IC's Director of Investigations, Kevon Stevenson, found evidentiary gaps in the probe. Those gaps, he says, which are of a technical nature, prevented him from recommending to the Director of Corruption Prosecution that criminal charges be pursued. The investigation examined contracts for projects including the Jamaica Moves campaign and COVID-19 initiatives. The IC says 14 of the 15 contracts were awarded to Market Me by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Those 14 contracts were awarded using the direct contracting method. The IC found that 2 of those 14 contracts for reimbursements represented a breach of the direct contracting method. One of those 2 contracts was valued at $1.7 million. The other was valued at $1.54 million. According to the IC, both contracts exceeded the direct contracting limit of $1.5 million. One contract exceeded the limit by just over $250,000, while the other exceeded the limit by just over $41,000. The IC also concluded that 3 instances in which the Health Ministry described the services rendered in the award of contracts to Market Me as reimbursements were inappropriate. According to the Commission, that demonstrates poor and ineffective procurement planning by the Health Ministry. The IC also concluded that the apparent award of 6 contracts to Market Me by the Health Ministry on the same day, May 1, 2019, was irregular and contrary to the principle of competition. Those 6 contracts range in value from $1.15 million at the lowest to $1.75 million at the highest. The anti-corruption body also found that the circumstances which gave rise to the award of one contract to Market Me for $15.81 million based on an unsolicited proposal as a serious irregularity. On the point of conflicts of interest, the IC says it found no evidence that the Health Minister, Dr. Christopher Tufton, was directly involved in the award of contracts to Market Me in the amount of $15.8 million. But according to the Commission, Dr. Tufton's actions could reasonably be considered to have indirectly influenced the engagement of Market Me. Regarding the attendance by Lindsay McDonough at a meeting of the Board of the National Health Fund, NHF, the Commission found that her presence was inappropriate and irregular. This as the meeting discussed the funding for an unsolicited proposal submitted by McDonough to the Health Ministry. In her defense, McDonough told the IC that the issue was never included on the formal agenda for the meeting, and that when the matter came up for discussion, she made no comment or contribution to the deliberations. Siobhan Campbell for Nationwide News.
Meanwhile, former Permanent Secretary in the Health Ministry Dunstan Bryan has pushed back on a suggestion by the Integrity Commission that contracts awarded to Market Me appear to have been splintered. Mahiri Stewart has that side of the story.
The former Permanent Secretary's letter to the anti-corruption body is affixed as an appendix to the investigation report. It's dated July 14, 2025. In the letter, the senior civil servant asked the IC's Director of Investigations to reconsider 5 points in his draft report before sending it to the Parliament. Key among them is point 5. It responds to the allegation that there was an attempt to splinter the Market Me contracts. The Integrity Commission based this conclusion on the payment of accumulated invoices spanning a 5-year period. Bryan takes issue with that conclusion. He told the Integrity Commission it should note that those contracts, taking the form of purchase orders, were for reimbursement of funds that were already spent by Market Me. Bryan says funds were existing commitments and were already agreed to 1 year before. The permanent secretary says as a consequence, they were due and payable. Bryan argues that an assessment of splintering of a contract under the Procurement Act is to be done at the beginning of the procurement process and not at the point of settlement or payment. The permanent secretary urged the Integrity Commission to examine the initial formulation of the contract. He says this would have ensured a logical assessment of the process. Bryan says an assessment of the purchase orders and supporting documents would confirm that some of the initial agreement for the provision of services were made 1 year before the invoices were presented for reimbursement. As the ministry's chief accounting officer, Bryan adds that the fact the invoices had all been presented at the same time for settlement should not be used as a supporting premise for the conclusion that the contracts to Market Me were ever splintered. Bryan says the items on each request for reimbursement were varied and therefore did not meet the definition for splintering under the Procurement Act. Despite Bryan's intervention, the IC maintained that the contracts appeared to have been splintered. The permanent secretary also corrected the IC on its conclusion that Market Me was contracted as a public relations firm and the description of contracts as reimbursement. Bryan also asked the IC to reassess its conclusion that the direct contracting process of the unsolicited proposal from Market Me was somehow inappropriate. Mahiri Stewart for Nationwide News.
Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health is acknowledging the need to strengthen its procurement practices in light of the Integrity Commission's report. In a statement today, the ministry noted that there were no findings of malfeasance by the Integrity Commission. But it says it acknowledges the need to strengthen the procurement processes to ensure greater levels of transparency in order to mitigate the perceptions as defined in the report. The Health Ministry also defended the impact and performance of the Jamaica Moves campaign. It says given the importance of the campaign to the reduction of the impact of NCDs on the population, it will review and assess measures to strengthen the program. The ministry reiterates that at no time was there any intent to circumvent the procurement process through contract splintering. It says once the matter was raised with the executive management team, all efforts were immediately made to cease all further advance payment transactions, regularize the transactions, and finalize the procurement process.
And Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton says he's pleased that the IC has reported no illegality by any party involved in its probe. Dr. Tufton says throughout the process, he has remained focused on fulfilling his duties as minister and on advancing the public health agenda in the best interest of the Jamaican people. The health minister says the matter, which has remained in the public domain for several years, has cast unfair doubt not only on his integrity, but also the reputation of others involved. Dr. Tufton says he regrets any hurt or reputational damage that may have resulted from the prolonged public scrutiny. He says he respects the processes now before the Speaker of the House and shall remain committed to serving with integrity.
In other news now, the long-awaited fraud trial of former Education Minister Ruel Reid and former President of the Caribbean Maritime University, the CMU, Professor Fritz Pinnock, failed to commence today in the Kingston and St. Andrew Parish Court. This after defense attorneys raised strong objections to what they described as ambush tactics by the prosecution, citing late and voluminous disclosures. The case, which initially started on October 10, 2019, is now approaching its 6th year before the court. Robian Williams was there.
Reid and Pinnock are jointly charged with Sharon Reid, Cheryl Reid, and Kim Brown Lawrence, the JLP councillor for the Brownstown Division. The five face multiple fraud-related charges linked to alleged multi-million-dollar irregularities at the CMU. The charges include breaches of the Corruption Prevention Act, conspiracy to defraud, misconduct in public office, and breaches of the Proceeds of Crime Act. During Tuesday's court appearance, attorney Carolyn Chuck, who represents Cheryl, told the court that it was virtually impossible to properly represent her client given the late service of thousands of pages of disclosure. She said full disclosure was only served on September 11, with some documents uploaded to a shared drive just hours before on the night of September 10. Chuck said, "It is unreasonable, the volume of disclosure. I feel as though I'm being ambushed." She added that not all required documents have been served and that a witness list ordered since May was only provided on September 26. Attorney Hugh Wildman, representing Pinnock, agreed, calling the prosecution's handling of disclosure improper. Anthony Armstrong, who represents Rural Reed, also took issue with the timing and scale of the disclosure, insisting that to be asked to go through the documents at the drop of a hat was unfair to the defense. Attorney Oswest Senior Smith, who appears for Councillor Brown Lawrence, highlighted that the case involves 92 witnesses. He warned that without better management and scheduling from the prosecution, the trial is going to break down over and over again. In response, Prosecutor Ashtel Steele expressed disappointment at what she described as repeated efforts by the defense to delay the proceedings. She said the prosecution had complied with the court's orders and practice directions regarding electronic disclosure. Steele explained that documents had to be rescanned and reorganized to improve readability and that any recent uploads to the shared drive were due to new materials received from the police. She added that those materials were likely already in the defense's possession. Steele also noted that the defense had previously objected to the prosecution's suggestion to start the trial in February 2026. With both sides at odds over the readiness of the case, the court is expected to determine the next steps in the coming days. Robeanne Williams for Nationwide News.
You're listening to the news on Nationwide at 5. We'll have more after these.